That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Hello, and welcome back to that podcast at the intersection of faith and fear, where every week, and especially this year, we discuss what scares us in order to find what saves us. This is the fear of God. Speaking to you right now is one of your hosts, Nathan Rouse, and typically with me is fellow co-host Reed Lackey. And guys, he was here a minute ago, but he got some notification on his phone and he said it looked like his copy of All of Them Witches had just shown up and he wanted to go just browse it real quick. I can't blame him. It's the new hot book on the stands, flying off the shelf on a broom. In the meantime, allow me to welcome all of you witches back into our big tent series for the year. What scares us / what saves us, a series defined by you. You've been submitting your stories of films and media that instilled or stoked a certain fearful imagining in you, and we are going to be covering them here on the show. While we wait on Reed to finish his book, voracious reader that we all know he is, I did want to take a minute to introduce you to a special guest today, and she who submitted. Come on, Reed will call me out on that one. Today's conversation topic, friends and foggers, welcome to the show, Asia Swartzentruber. Asia, welcome.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
Oh my goodness.
Can you believe it?
I know. How did I get here?
I ask myself that way too often. Asia, thank you so much for submitting your What Scares Us and for being willing to come discuss what scares you on the show. As you well know by now, but listeners, especially if they're new, may not, here at the Fear of God, we explore. We do not explain, except for right now, when I explain that you can listen to the Fear of God at your nearest podcast platform. You can watch the Fear of God on YouTube, and you can browse the Fear of God on the web at thefearofgodpodcast.com, where you will find, wait a minute, is that Albert Finney's understudy? Well, let's lace up our Satan shoes and welcome back to the show, Reed! Reed, you are here, brother. You are here.
Freaking Albert. Hey, Albert
man.
Finney's understudy. There are worse adventures you've sent me on than being Albert Finney's understudy. I appreciate that.
Oh, for sure. What's fun about that one is because you probably know this by now, but as I'm watching a movie, I'm paying attention to content and theme, but I'm really like, okay, what's a really dumb thing I can have Reed do?
Sure.
And every now and then a movie
painfully
offers
obvious.
multiple things. And so this just gave me the opportunity to meld a bunch of them together. Riri,
I appreciate
we got a
it.
guest.
Hey, Asia, welcome to the show. We're so glad to
Hello.
have you.
It's so good to be here. This is such a treat.
Awesome. Well, it's a treat for us as well. So I'm anxious to dive into the material that we have at play. Nathan, do we have any business?
Do we have
Usual
business? We'd want people to join the Facebook group because it's a lot of fun there.
Please. It is lots of fun.
To talk about horror movies and not horror movies. Leave an iTunes review, and Reed, we have what our next week's show requires a little bit of homework. Do you want to tell them about that?
Yes. Okay. So that's important. So it's not super overwhelming, but will require more time than typically just watching a movie. Next week, due to another What Scares Us submission, we will be covering the first season of, it started on Sci-Fi, but now is available on the streaming service Shudder and a couple of other outlets. The first season of Channel Zero. It's an anthology show. So check out Channel Zero, specifically the one called Candle Cove. That is the first season, and that is going to be our coverage next week. It is 6 television episodes. They are less than 45 minutes each. So it's a little over 4 hours of viewing, a little longer than we normally would have you prep for, but still pretty digestible. So next week, we're going to be diving into Channel Zero, Candle Cove. We would love for you to join us with that. So check it out. Again, it's available to all 4 seasons of Channel Zero are currently available to stream on Shudder. So you can check them out there. And I think it's available to rent in a numerous other outlets. So
Asia,
yes,
have you
check
seen
out
Channel Zero?
I have not.
It's rough. It's
very scary.
It's terrifying. It's really terrifying.
It's very scary. I'm amazed it was on Sci-Fi Channel, honestly. Like, it was a Sci-Fi original.
Yeah.
And, considering that their other big claim to fame is like Sharknado and, like Mecha Shark versus Gigantic Octopus or whatever that other thing is, like, you see something like, oh, Channel Zero. It's
they're
probably
just eclectic.
but then like you watch it and you're like, holy crap, this is like legit. Like,
Bring me the sharks.
Really, yeah, it's really unnerving. You got to wind
back
down
the sharks.
the shark.
Well, speaking of things being watched, Asia, since you are here, it is time for our segment where we discuss things we've been watching. But I want to lead us in with something rather particular, not to make it awkward.
What are you watching, reading, and listening to? What are you watching, reading, and listening to? You must tell us, Nathan, and read what you watch and listen and read what you watching, reading, listening to. La 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 la.
You know, Ka is a wheel, and who knew we'd be at a moment where that would materialize? because in addition to just being a fan of the show and hanging out in the Facebook group and contributing your Whatcha there, you might or might not recall you and your husband inspired the Whatcha stuff.
That is
In
true.
fact,
Yeah.
I was thinking about this today because back when y'all first submitted your, was it an original tune or was it to a theme?
It was so there was that, and then there was a really terrible rap that we recorded together.
Nothing terrible about
what
that.
I'm referring
That
to
was
is the
delightful.
video y'all sent of the two of
Oh,
y'all
yeah.
singing before you were watching Halloween or
During
something like
the
that.
Omen. Yeah, we
The
were
Omen,
just
the
sort
Omen.
of, yeah.
That was it. And I remember showing it to my wife one night, like, look at these people, they're singing our tune.
Yeah.
And for the first time, I think even my wife was like, wait a minute, y'all are for real? Y'all do a thing? And people actually listen. So
Fans?
You single-handedly legitimized us.
right, yes.
So there it is.
And yet here you are. So thank you for offering that. If you're unfamiliar listener, that is the theme to the movie Rosemary's Baby. A score that I was listening to today until it would get to the Coven part, and I'd skip that because that's a little weird.
Ooh.
So yes, what are we watching, reading, listening to? Reed, why don't you go first?
What? Okay. Oh, yeah, sure. By all means, I was going to let our guest go first.
Okay. Well, now you're making it awkward.
No, it makes a little bit of sense because then, I'll lead into it. So I have been reading a lot, as listeners know, and
all of them witches.
All of them witches. It was, it's overdue from the library. I think I'll keep
All
it.
of them witches.
All of them witches.
All of them witches.
DEM.
It's an anagram. So the book that I just picked up last week, this is so Read. This book is so Read. I cannot believe I did not know of its existence prior to now. It is called The TV Book, and it is written by Alan Sepinwall and Matt Zoller-Seitz. Yeah. And so the pair of them, here is what the entire book is. It's like 400 pages. And Lackey the Listicle in me just delighted when I saw this. Alan Sepinwall and his writing partner, Matt Zoller-Seitz, are both TV critics on a regular basis. That's their constant profession. And so they got together and just decided to create a definitive sort of canon of the 100 greatest TV shows of all time, with some criteria that they counted down. They butted heads on a few places where there were ties and kind of had little arguments and stuff. And so what the book is a sequence of essays on the 100 greatest TV shows of all time, with some additional like supplemental material on some things that were worth noting but didn't quite make the list or whatever. So when I saw this book and saw that Amazon Kindle had it for like $2.99, I was like, oh my gosh. And so I've had a delightful time. I'm decided firmly to only go through it like a piece at a time. Rather, there's so much temptation when I see a list of like, oh, let me just browse everything that made the list and then I'll go back and read. But I was like, no, I'm just going to go through a piece at a time. I'm going to have it be surprise, because they did not list in the table of contents what actually made the list. They just sequenced it as such that you could just move through the book, which I love that about it, because it's a surprise. I don't know what's coming.
So you started at 100 and you're just tracking through?
No. It starts at 1. So they count up, I guess you could say. So yeah, it basically starts with the top 10, and really the chapters writ large are the top 10, which they call the inner circle, and then there's 11 through 50, which they call no doubt about it classics. Then there's like 51 to 75, and then 76 to 100, and then after that they have some other chapters. And each TV series just gets its own, 7 or 8 page essay on why it's one of the greatest TV shows.
I mean,
of
the
all
two
time.
of them, I bet The Leftovers is in the top 10.
Leftovers is not in top 10.
Really? Where is
not.
it?
No.
Oh, have you gotten to it yet?
No, because I've only
Okay.
made it to the top 10. But of course, the book won me over right away by ranking number 1 was The Simpsons. After a literal like 22-page debate where they just printed their Google
I remember
chat.
when this came out, because I've followed Steppenwolf for a while, and his book The Revolution was televised.
I want to read that. Yeah.
One that's really good, but he writes for Rolling Stone now, and Zoller Seitz is who I referenced during The Leftovers, who had such a deep response to Matt Jameson. So that's why I was wondering if they
interesting.
were
Okay.
on there.
I mean, I'm sure it may rank high in the list,
Sure.
but at where I'm at right now, because I picked up the book last week, probably the first like 50 pages or so are them laying out the criteria by which they ranked these. These were our rules, these were our self-imposed exclusions, etc. What we did and did not include. And then they just moved through the list. And so I just made it through the top 10. But yeah, the debate, because there was a 5-way tie for number 1. So in terms of like their scoring, they just let the math do the work. But then when they scored everything, there were 5 shows that hit the top score, and they were all at the same. And it was The Simpsons, The Sopranos, The Wire, Cheers, and Breaking Bad. And so then they have like a 25-page, again, transcript of their Google chat while they're actively debating which one should get the top spot and why. And it's so much fun to read. If you're interested in TV and TV history.
That you are right. I've known about the book for a while, and it would not have clicked with me that that's a you book, but that is a you
very much
book.
Yeah, that is very much a me book.
So
So I'm loving it. That's what I've been reading. It's called the TV book. And for those who read Amazon Kindle, it is at least as of this recording, it's available for $2.99. Well worth the price if you're into that sort of thing. So there you go.
Asia, what you up to? What you reading? What you watching? What maybe are you listening to?
It's interesting. J-Mark and I, J-Mark is my husband for those listening. We tend to waffle back and forth between things a little bit sporadically, but I chose the one thing that's just mine that I'm watching by myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really enjoying it because I'm a huge fan of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but I have been going through and I'm almost done with the first season of Ratchet.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
now is there more than one season?
I don't believe so.
Okay, yeah.
I'm presuming there will be more, but having not finished the first season yet, I guess I can't be sure. I mean, they got to get to the movie-ish at some point.
Sure. And
how do you like it?
Feeling?
I'm enjoying it. The Ratchet presented in the TV show, at least at this point, is, in my opinion, not the Ratchet of Cuckoo's Nest. But I'm interested to see if over the course of the show she becomes more like her, or if they're more just taking the approach of this is a character inspired by Cuckoo's Nest, and we're going to just sort of embody this character in a different way.
Sure.
It really plays a lot like American Horror Story being created by, the same folks who created that.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody's into American Horror Story, I think they'd really like Ratchet because it really just kind of feels like the same universe, but just in a parallel corner somewhere. But I know American Horror Story isn't everybody's cup of tea, but
I started American Horror Story when it first aired, and I got about 3 episodes in.
Yeah.
And I was like, nope, too scary.
So what's funny about that to me is
that was long before The Fear of God.
It was, yeah.
Mm.
And when the first season aired, I've always been, for as long as I can remember, a horror fanatic. So I was really excited for it. First season, I watched it. It was all great, but my wife was pregnant at the time. And then when the second season was about to air, the second season was where there was all this, because it was like kind of hardcore for the time.
Yeah.
At least that first season. And then the second season was coming out, and my son was about to be born. And the second season had a lot of like religious imagery. I still haven't gone back and watched the second season, but it had like a lot of like really religious imagery. And I just at that point just made a conscious decision where I was like, I'm not off on horror, but I also don't want to like roll a bunch of dice with what's going on
and come up sixes.
So I backed off of that. And it's interesting because when I think it was the most recent season that they were doing, the one that was like based on slashers, 1984 was the one that they were doing. I dove into it, and in the process of diving into it, went back and watched sporadically a couple of the previous seasons. Sarah Paulson's in it, the star of Ratchet. So I could see, not having watched a single episode of Ratchet, I could see how that would probably feel very akin to the same kind of niche. So yeah, Ratchet is on my radar for eventual viewing. So let us know what you think about it once you finish it.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it a lot so far, but we'll see where it goes.
Sure. What about you, Nathan?
What about me?
Yeah. What?
Yeah. This one has an a humorous sort of inroad to our film today. So I have been watching the Netflix show Pretend It's a City, which had a really funny joke on Facebook recently.
I saw that.
It's really funny. That's an off-pod joke that I'll tell you about, Reed. But but it is funny. DM me if you want to know, listener. But so anyway, I had so Pretend It's a City is produced by Martin Scorsese. It's like 7 or maybe 8 episodes, 30 minutes each, and features the kind of personality essayist, rather sardonic human Fran Lebowitz, who I was really unfamiliar with. I've recently grown to appreciate a podcast called Sway featuring the journalist Kara Swisher. Anyway, Fran Lebowitz was on Kara Swisher's podcast. I was like, that sounds interesting. She's an interesting person. And it's really just this rough-edged love letter to New York City. By way of her, like literally the episodes are just interviews with her, and it's very documentary style, but Scorsese shows up in it multiple times. They've got vignettes of her in various New York locales and speaking engagements. Reed, I think you would actually really enjoy it.
Cool.
My wife and I both watched it, and it just became a fun, like, let's watch this interesting person talk about a place we have some affection for. And specifically the final episode, I think, is called Library, and she just talks about books and talks about it's she and Scorsese at a library, and she just, anyway, it's very humorous. It's an easy, there's a world where someone would watch it and be like, I don't know if I like her personality. It's very defined.
Okay,
but it's kind of fun too. And I watched it, and I will speak very lovingly of the city of New York, having only been there about 3 times, but I just have this real, mystical romanticism about it. And watching that show, you're just like, oh God, I don't want to go there. And so then when I started Rosemary's Baby, not to get into the content too heavy, but when it starts, I was like, because I really knew nothing about the movie, clearly, based on last week or whenever that was. And I was like, I want to go there. And then by the end of it, you're like, I don't want to go there. Anyway, so Pretend It's a City featuring Fran Lebowitz, and that has been another installment of Whatcha, Watchin. Yeah, that was the end of that one. Let's try that again. What is our timestamp right now?
Yeah, fix that.
I will.
I shouldn't have made it so long.
That's all right.
No.
That's all right. We won't do the whole thing the second time, but just get the energy of it.
The whole thing will be on the second time in the edit.
So yeah, that has been another installment of What You Watching. Sudden energy change. And scene. Awesome. So yes, I love it.
I love that. Okay, so first of all, I know we have a couple of things to get to first, but so A, you have a lovely voice.
Oh, thank you.
B,
He was talking to me.
I had not.
Oh, sorry. Obviously.
You're fine too, Asia.
Obviously.
You're like, you know, like, perfectly competent. Okay. So
Passable.
But the second piece is that I had not seen Rosemary's Baby in a number of years. I can't even remember when I had seen it the first time. This is probably my second viewing. But the tune gets stuck in your head. And I was realizing, because I watched it a couple of nights ago, I was realizing that as I was doing it, I could not avoid hearing your voice sing the Whatcha Watchin lyrics as it was stuck in my head. Because
Success.
right, because the song is so, it's just la-las. That's all it is. So there's nothing really mentally to latch onto. But I had your song submitted to us was probably earlier than my reviewing of this film. So it was stuck in my head like all day. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, success. Yes, success. Well done.
Yes, indeed. All right. So before we fully visit the city that never sleeps, Asia, we have talked a lot, and so now you're going to get a turn for a moment to have the floor. And we do this with every guest. It's a pair of questions. I'm going to ask them both because it's possible their answers intertwine with each other. So the two questions are, Asia, our guest, what got you into the horror genre or genre material writ large? And then the other one would be, other than Rosemary's Baby, because that's why we're all here today, do you have any favorite horror or genre material you'd point to? So take it away. How did you get into it? What are some favorites?
The short answer of how I got into horror is my husband. The long answer is my husband.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Good to know.
I was definitely not a horror fan at all growing up. I kind of grew up in a family that did not really appreciate the horror genre. I was a very skittish little kid. I scared easily. I spooked easily. I did not seek out being scared. So it was a very, very foreign concept to me, the idea that being unnerved or upset by something could be enjoyable or edifying. That was a totally foreign concept to me.
Right.
But as a kid, I also was always sort of simultaneously drawn to things that were macabre and gothic. Like I could stomach a lot of very old school horror films like Dracula. And I was always absolutely fascinated with the imagery of Nosferatu and things like that, but just wouldn't get close enough to really look further. And when I met my husband, he was an avid horror fan. And through pretty much basically exposure therapying me, he got me to see how, I guess, beautiful so much of the content within something scary can be. He explained to me the plot of Sinister, kind of the first time we ever really talked about horror. And that was sort of my gateway into seeing how a story could be a cautionary tale, and that there is value to being afraid of something, and there are things to be afraid of, and it's okay to be reminded of that. And I don't know if it was a great idea to start me out with. I
was going to say
that's a deep end one.
Well, that wasn't the first one we watched.
Okay.
The first one we watched was Insidious. Followed very closely by The Conjuring and then The Babadook.
Those are some heavy hitters.
Yeah, definitely got thrown into the deep end of the pool. Yeah.
Right.
But that does transition pretty well into what some of my other favorite horror material is. I would say very, very high on the list of my favorite horror material is The Babadook, because that is genuinely a story that just, I didn't sleep for days. And it really connected with hashtag what scares me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Can you give a little context? Like, what's the timetable we're talking about here? Is that a year ago? Is that 5 years ago? When did that journey begin?
I would say it began almost almost 6 years ago
Okay.
now.
So it's been a little bit.
It has, yeah. I'm much more eager to jump in now, and occasionally I watch through my fingers sometimes, but most of the time I actually want to catch what's going on, and I'm all for the hype and the chills.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Well, I'm wondering. So part of me has the impulse to sort of inquire about your connection to Rosemary's Baby as a lead-in. Reed, does that feel okay as a next step to kind of go there? Or is there something else you want to?
Sure.
Because I asked you to omit that from your list here, but in hearing you talk, it's like, okay, well, where did this one show up? Because this is a very specific film, not just because of its age, but also just its style and content, the factors surrounding it. So maybe as our first steps into talking about the film itself, tell us about how did you find this one? How did it find you? What's that connection been like?
Yeah, so I first really even heard about this movie. I knew vaguely in the ether that it existed somewhere, but I didn't know anything about it. My first real connection with it was when I went to J-Mark one day, kind of out of curiosity, and just said, "What's the most disturbing thing you've ever seen in a horror movie?"
Oh, wow.
And he said, "Well, there's this scene from Rosemary's Baby," and he had only seen this scene. And I'll try not to give away too much until we get there.
Sure, sure.
But this is no dream. This is really happening. To him, that affected him so deeply that nothing else has ever really stuck with him. Which having the catalog of horror films in his background that he has, I find really fascinating, because, this is an older film, and it does, it's very effective. But I think a lot of people might not say this film is traditionally quote unquote scary.
Sure.
So we later, many years later, just decided, why don't we sit down and watch it? And I think I started watching it sitting on the couch, and by about 15 seconds into it, I was on the floor, just like a kid sitting too close to the TV screen, completely zoned in. Everything about the opening credits just spoke to me. I think, like I said, I watched old movies growing up, so there's sort of this nostalgia element to it. Very into the style of this film, and the way that it's shot. And after watching it the first time, I have probably seen this film, not exaggerating, upwards of 17 times.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Not necessarily every viewing sitting down, focusing only on the screen.
Sure.
But this is a background movie. I love having this play in the background while I do stuff.
It's a good one to have, like, if you have a dinner party and it's just on, and like some people have music and it's like, oh, who's this artist we're listening to, and you have this one on.
What's interesting, so a couple of things about that. So what's interesting is so I don't know exactly where my contribution to the conversation will go, because I don't always do this. I've referenced this a couple of times on the show when I've done this. There've been, most of the time we watch it with a certain degree of intention. We're going to have a conversation about it. So we're going to, jot notes. Oh, that line, that scene, that whatever. I don't know why I thought this. Maybe it was because of a distant echo of something that I had in my mind. I did, for the first time for me, read the book before watching the film, and I had not read the book before. And I took a few notes while I was reading the book, so it may have been baked into that. But where I'm going is, when I watched the movie, I didn't take any notes while watching the movie. I figured I would jot a few things down afterwards, but I didn't like pause it to go and watch. I wanted to have the kind of viewing experience. And again, I don't know what the impulse was that drove me to this, but where I was just like, no, I'm just going to sit down. The phone and pad and whatever is away, and I'm just going to watch the movie. And it is really, it has a style that's very captivating. And it is obviously, 1968, it's very classical in its structure and its approach, its aesthetic. So I can totally see, you mentioned like that first viewing experience of just getting kind of sucked into the TV. I can totally see that because
That was the devil.
that was, could it be Satan? but it's like it really does have this because okay, so I have some things to mention. I'm walking a bit of a line here because if I was invited onto a show where they said, hey, we're going to talk about The Exorcist, and Exorcist is my favorite film, and I was invited onto a show and the co-hosts very belligerently just sort of tramped on all the things that I was waiting to share, I would be very frustrated by that. So I'm walking a little bit of a line where I'm like, I know a lot of things about like either the background or a lot of like stuff like that, but I really want to yield first and just say like, we talked a little bit about your history, but what have you since it now being embraced as like a favorite film and something that you really champion? Have you done any sort of extra historical research, or is there anything about the trivia or the making of it that really stands out to you as you've dove into it and it's become, real? Oh, you there with the hand.
Yes.
Okay. Two. Well, a frame for that too is, because this series is about what scares us. And
sure, right.
And I would sort of entreat, I forgot to look up your submission. I sent Vera's to her on the fly, so she read hers live. But when you say, hey, this movie would qualify as this what scares us idea, yes, we'll get to sort of technical aspects, but like leading us into the broader conversation of the film, how would you address that with this movie? What are some identifying elements in the film itself that you're like, okay, this aspect to it is what would qualify me as being able to say this movie is a what scares us?
Oh man, for me, it really came down to the fact that I related to Rosemary in a lot of ways that kind of upset me. I have a very similar personality to her and temperament to her. Over time, the more I absorbed the movie, I was trying to figure out why I did connect with her so much and why I just felt this compulsion to constantly come back and why it was so strong. And in all reality, I think it's because knowing my personality and my temperament and what my likes, my interests are, my life goals are, if I had been Rosemary, I don't think I would have done much, if anything, differently. And that's always been a very freaky, scary thought to me.
Right.
And being an introvert, this movie, I think I said these exact words in my submission, it makes me nauseous. The idea of living so close to somebody, so invasive, and having had, sans the whole getting impregnated by the devil side of it, I have had somebody, I have had somebody in my life very much like a mini Castevet previously, who I obviously will leave unnamed, but I've had a mini Castevet in my life who, during a very vulnerable season, knew how to ask very personal questions in a way that made me feel rude by not answering them
for sure
with such confidence. And I kind of know what it feels like to have that sense of self surrendered in a situation that you walk away from feeling like, I did not intend to share any of this. Like this piece of my life was not yours, but somehow it is all of the sudden. And those were elements I could really connect to in this film.
Well, and kind of what you're saying strikes a chord. So watching the film for the first time, my wife does not get into horror in a general sense. She has dipped her toes in a little more the last year or so, but even then it's more with just let me indulge Nathan begging me to watch this thing. But it's interesting because my wife would identify as an introvert, and a phrase that has come up sometimes in our conversations is self-forgetting. And we have 3 kids, and you've listened to the show long enough. I'm a loud personality, and it's funny, her friggin' line, oh, you know how actors are, they're all a bit self-centered. I was like, son of a Rosemary, reading my mail. But it is interesting because, you know, and I want us to structure the conversation however we want, but also to follow the, you know, where the crumbs lead. And there's a world where most of these films we look at, they're metaphors. It's heightened elements meant to evoke, provoke, illustrate. And to your point, no, you know, the extremes of this one put it at opposition with a reality-based experience. But by the end of it, you're like, knowing the experience of my marriage and my interaction as far as that goes, you watch this person, you're like, well, and what made me think of this before I dig myself a hole is your comment about Minnie and that scene, because what's hilarious, knowing nothing about the movie, when Minnie entered the story, not when they're seeing Terry's body, but when she re-enters as neighbor character, I was like, look at this old lady, she's so fun. And then the further it goes, you're like, oh, something ain't right. But the scene you're identifying, when Rosemary finally is putting up some boundaries, you know, establishing some boundaries, and I don't remember exactly what's going on, but Minnie keeps pushing in, and Rosemary's finally like, hey, no, and gets her out. But
she wants
knowing
to have that other party.
Knowing this relationship I personally have, and just watching those sorts of scenarios, like it takes a person like that a hell of a lot of work to make the simplest boundary line. And so I totally understood, not from personal experience as one who's experienced that, but as one who dadgummit, is probably a Minnie. I mean, really, like, that is a really frustrating admission to make right here, but has probably been that person. Like, but what about this? What about this? And my poor wife, she's got, you know, 3 kids. We've got a puppy now. It's like, she probably just is like, fine, I'll be the devil's mom. Okay, fine. Just, can someone get off my back? You know, you guys just keep.
Okay, Nathan, I'll if you insist. It's gonna be a long year, but I
just don't even know what dinner is. I'm fine. I'll rock the devil.
New Fear of God t-shirts. Okay, I'll be the devil's mom.
Man, that's a tough explaining, you know, that one. Anyway, so it is interesting hearing you respond to it in that way, because, you know, again, even for me watching it, and I mean, the film has a mesmerizing effect in its presentation. Reed, what you think about over there?
So what's interesting is it still strikes me as weird that it's been so long between viewings of the film. This was only my second viewing of the film, and I'd seen it when I was much younger and was not married, did not have a family. I myself am also an introvert, but in many ways, there are things I think you have to have certain life-based connecting points to be able to enter into what a film is exploring really effectively. You know, we don't come fully formed as like these explorers that we turn ourselves into. But Rosemary's Baby had always been on my radar, because anytime, as I've read through several things, when they talk about what brought the horror genre into mainstream pop culture, it was 3 novels. One of them was Thomas Tryon's The Other, which most people don't talk about very much except in this context, The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty, and Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. Rosemary's Baby was the first one, and it was a publication behemoth, and it just absolutely swept the globe by storm with popularity. And then, you know, right on its heels, those other 2 novels came on, and suddenly the horror genre is a very big marketable prestige thing, you know. So Rosemary's Baby was always sort of in the underbelly of like a landmark.
When did The Exorcist film release, Reed?
73. And so, you know, it's all in this proximal, you know, like late 60s to early 70s kind of benchmark. And so, but Rosemary's Baby was for a long time a film that I appreciated but couldn't understand, and I still don't feel like I understand it. But it was one that I just sort of recognized, like, yeah, Rosemary's Baby, it's legit. People are still discussing it in all of these varied fashion for like 45 years later. So clearly it's got bona fides, but wasn't something that personally connected to me. And I won't say that this recent viewing like really just sort of galvanized my imagination, but there was so much more that I was able to, like when you described from the moment you said that there was an individual in your life who was a surrogate for Minnie Castevet, I was like, I felt that. I was like, oh yeah, God, like I can get that. We've lived enough life now that people can be that way, and how hard it can be to try to stand up under that kind of pressure.
He's talking about me too.
I wasn't gonna say it, but and I was trying to be protective of my friend, but no, that's fine. We'll just hang a lantern on that right there. I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. But I feel like in many ways, this is a film that I'm still trying to wrap my head around precisely what it's trying to do. Historically speaking, you can look at what it actually did in pop culture in a number of different ways, and it did a ton. There are films to this day. I mean, its influence on the horror genre and horror films and even horror literature is almost incalculable. I mean, the different things that they've done, and it was largely responsible. Ira Levin, the author, had even stated later in years that he kind of regretted this because he didn't believe in the devil. But this book, in many ways, along with The Exorcist, was responsible for sort of laying the groundwork for like the satanic panic of the 70s and 80s. And we still see residual effects of that today. And, we can touch on that as little or as much as we want to, but I feel like in many ways, this is still a film that I'm trying to, like, it's hard to deny its power, but I walk away still not quite sure, not in a negative way, just not quite sure everything that it's trying to explore or trying to say, because I feel like it's a really rich and deep film, which speaks to the craftsmanship and the quality of it, that it's that effective still, 68. I mean, like when anyway, so that's just my sort of experience with it. I really want to be really intentional about just sort of like, hey, where we go with it, this is what you had cited. Now, am I correct in that you'd cited this as one of your favorite films, or maybe your favorite film, or is it just up there from it?
This is definitely one of my favorite films, regardless of genre. I would say it waffles in the top 3.
Yeah. Okay. And so if you don't mind, like unpack that a little bit, because obviously, like laying some groundwork, one of the reasons I was eager to have this conversation with you was because I love, and this is not a pressure thing. This is just, I get excited when I get the chance to talk about something I know is a big deal, but I don't know why it's a big deal, and get to hear from someone who connects with it on that level more precisely what pings and what it sort of draws out from that. So if you don't mind, just sort of run with that for a bit. Sure.
I mean, the first thing that struck me during my first viewing of the film is simply that, this is a stylish movie, and it kind of feels lame to cite something that feels shallow given how deep and to what extremes this movie goes. Right. But I don't think it's possible to watch this film without giving credit to how just visually beautiful it is. And it can be hideous at other times, but the visuals of this film at every single moment are meticulous, to the way that certain shots are framed, to the lighting, just always giving the atmosphere exactly what I feel the scene needed to keep you sucked in. Right. And keep the tension building. The rubber band just keeps being drawn tighter and tighter. And I feel like a lot of that has to do with just the visuals, what you have to constantly look at. I've seen this movie so many times, and every time I notice something different visually that I didn't notice before. The costumes are they're beautiful, and they're very much a product of their time, but they're also ahead of their time. That's something I've always been very drawn to in films. Sure. I loved very much the casting in that, again, Minnie pinged with me so quickly, because down to her accent, the way she dressed, everything about her.
Ruth
just
Gordon won an Oscar for it. I
She
apologize for
did.
interrupting, but she won an Oscar for that performance. Yeah.
And I loved the ending of her acceptance speech. This isn't verbatim, but at the ending of her acceptance speech, she said, to everybody who voted me, I thank you very much. And to those of you who didn't, please excuse me. And then she walked off stage.
That's great.
But I guess I would say the thing that I constantly come back to with this film is the fact that I love Rosemary. I just love her as a character. I see so many facets of who she is that I wish I could be like. There's so much tenderness in her, and there's so much productivity in her. She's such an advocate for everybody around her. If only any one of them had been willing to be that kind of advocate for her and not eventually go into a coma. But this movie pinged a lot of very personal experiences in my life. If I do bring up anything personal to my life, just be aware J Mark is cool with me sharing anything I do end up sharing that's been talked
Cool.
about
Yeah.
outside.
Gotcha.
Cool.
But just
Cool.
being a bit more of being the more mild mannered in this, given the circumstances of the two of us in a relationship. My husband is the more charismatic. He is the more people person. He is, the sparkly one of the two of us. I related to that element. I related to this desire to be a homemaker and something feeling like it's always in the way. There are a lot of elements of Rosemary I love in terms of watching her come into her own power towards the end, albeit tragically, maybe not too late, but watching her rise from such a meek character to this tragic lioness that she becomes is just empowering to me. And this movie kind of always served for me as a mental template to remember that there is a path to courage, even, around terrible, terrible obstacles.
Right.
And hopefully that was all coherent.
It absolutely was. And what's interesting, something that, and I'm not picking on you, Nathan, when I say this, but like, I know you did not, hell of a setup. So, but I know you didn't get a chance to read the book beforehand. One thing that was not clear to me until I read the book was Rosemary's exertion of her agency towards the end. So what's interesting is my very first viewing of it, and this was again years ago. I was probably in high school or college when I saw it for the first time. I can't remember. When it gets to the end, all I could remember, and gosh, we haven't even done this for the listeners. So listeners, if you have just no context whatsoever for Rosemary's Baby, none whatsoever, a very angelic, sort of cherubic woman and her very exuberant actor husband move into an apartment in New York, and they are quickly sort of setting about the life of settling into this New York apartment. They have neighbors who are very, pushy and exuberant and whatever, but they're trying to make a family. And there's a lot of conversation early on about how they want a family and they're trying to make a family. Well, then one night, Rosemary, after feeling very sort of out of it, she has, by her understanding in the moment, we later find out it was intentional that she was drugged. But by her understanding in the moment, she just feels weak and woozy. She has this very, very bizarre dream in which she feels as if she was assaulted by someone or something that she felt was otherworldly to a degree. That's the moment that Asia had referenced earlier. Oh my God, this is not a dream. This is really happening. Well, then she discovers that she's pregnant, and without going through every single beat of the film, the pregnancy is bizarre, and there's lots of moments along the way where people continue to push her into decisions she does not want to make. Going to a doctor she does not really know or trust, but she is compliant, and she goes along with it, and then all of these little things. She wants to get, pills. She wants to read her own dang book on what it's like to be pregnant, but they keep pushing her away from that kind of stuff. Well, then towards the end of the film, she begins through a series of uncoverings and discoveries, she begins to believe that her neighbors and even possibly, God forbid, her husband are complicit in this big conspiracy to steal her baby for a devilish ritual, for like a witchcraft ritual type of thing. And that becomes like the last third of the film, is her trying to maintain protection for her child while these beings are trying to, steal it for their other nefarious purposes. So then we're just going to spoil the ending, because I don't think you can talk about this film without talking about that piece of it. Then at the end, what happens is she believes deeply, she gives birth, and then they tell her that the baby has died. But then she begins to hear a baby inside the apartment complex, because the walls are thin and they carry sound really well. So she begins to hear a baby, and in her explorations of that, there's a lot of things that go into it. She sort of breaks free from, they were drugging her and keeping her sedated. She breaks free from that. And when she breaks in on what she believes to be this coven ritual thing, they have her baby there. And when she sees her baby for the first time, she is supremely freaked out. And we don't get in the film to see what the baby fully looks like, but she asks what's wrong with its eyes. And then that's when they got him, one of the most intense things in any movie you're likely to see. That's when they break out in, he has his father's eyes. And that's when you realize, oh my God, she had the devil's baby. And that then they break out in all this like Hail Satan chants, and everything gets it turns pretty heavy and hard very, very quickly. But what I was speaking about earlier, and then I'll pass the baton if anybody else has strong thoughts, is that but then she is drawn into, they're rocking the baby, but they're doing it too fast and too vigorously, and her motherly instincts kick in, and she's like, you're rocking the baby too hard, like you're not making him comfortable or comforted. And my first viewing of the film, I actively do not feel this is an appropriate reading of the film now, but my first viewing of the film was like, dang, what a tragedy, man. Like, she's stuck sort of, taking care of this baby. But in point of fact, in the book, it makes it much more explicit that she's like, well, he's half the devil, but he's also half me. And there was a much stronger sense of, when she makes the choice that she's going to step in and be this baby's mother, it was not something, probably the first moment in the story, that she had not actually been coerced into anything, but that she made a conscious choice to say, I'm going to play a part in raising this child, maybe the most influential part, if I can help it. And I found that really compelling. I found that captivating in a way that I had not experienced of the film or the story beforehand. So I see that piece of it.
If I can throw in, by the way, the baby was actually played by Carrie Fisher.
you, who knew? Who knew?
That's why you didn't know. That's why it's an uncredited appearance.
Yeah.
Really funny there is, and we don't have to linger here long. The reason I said that, whenever that was, is because in the recesses of my memory, I was recalling there's an episode of 30 Rock called Rosemary's Baby that features Carrie Fisher as a guest star.
Oh, okay.
So in the moment, I heard the name and I was like, oh, Carrie Fisher. And then by the time I was there, I had to commit, and I was like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Sure.
So no, Carrie Fisher is not in this movie.
Which I will say as a quick aside, I do think that not showing the baby at the end was one of the best decisions they could have possibly made. I feel like it was a little bit akin to in The Witch, like, you can't show us the goat talking. You just can't do that. It's not going to work. And to not show us the baby, but only have us go off of Rosemary's horrified expression and her reactions to whatever it is she's seeing really, really captured my imagination. And I feel like that was such in my opinion, that was a good decision, just visually.
Absolutely. It's so much more powerful. And I mean, it should be noted, we're gonna hang a lantern on this as well, that like obviously we're covering a film of tremendous power, and clearly, you know, it brings up a lot of things. It is worth just noting and then just sliding right down the road that Roman Polanski is a figure of extreme controversy. I think we're all making an active decision to just acknowledge that, yes, we're aware of that. We're talking about Rosemary's Baby, which is as much in the finished product of the film. I think, Asia, you had said this off pod, and I fully agree. The film that is translated, other than the visual, stylistic, and aesthetic choices, which cannot be ignored because they're they're excellent. The story itself is very much Ira Levin's imagination. That's, you know, because it was almost translated from book to film with how much was left.
You know, it's interesting. I read something about that today that basically presumed that because of how early it was in Polanski's career, and I don't think he'd done an adaptation yet, he didn't know he could be more freewheeling creatively, and so kept hewed very closely to the text of the book.
Right.
It really is so close. Oh, go ahead.
No.
You
do it.
It really is so close. All you'd have to do is read the book and scratch things out with a pencil, and that's the movie. Like, just redact, and then you're left with the movie.
No, absolutely. And I think, like, I think you mentioned earlier something that I think is really astute about this film is like from almost frame one. And I mean, Mia Farrow is the type of person who, the moment she's on screen, well, this is my impulse. I don't know if it's everybody's impulse, but the moment she's on screen, I have an impulse to want to be protective of her. Like I adore her, you know, like she has a kind of a fragility to her when you see her on screen. And it's like, you can sense just an abiding sweetness to who she is, and the way she navigates her world, again, like very compliant and very sort of yielding to all of the people around her. And there's this impulse that rises up of like, oh no, you want to be protective of this character. And it is, Nathan, you did not have, I know you didn't watch you'd never seen the film before, and I don't know, I'm getting the vibe you also had no idea where the film was going when you went into it. But knowing, from having read the book and from having seen the film a time before, knowing the conspiracy that was at play, it pissed me off so bad watching the people piece by piece just, you know, aggressively override, both ignoring her desires and actively overriding her choices piece by piece. And knowing the conspiracy that was at play made it frustrating on her behalf to see that play out, you know, just over and over and over again. And I don't know, like, this is a bit, you know, I don't know where we're going to go from here, but I would ask that, Nathan, like, I'm curious what you were thinking along those lines, not know, like, well, I guess I just wanted to point blank note. Did you have any sort of inclination that this is going to, she had the devil's baby? Like, what were your thoughts as you were?
Oh, I mean, while it is true, this is my first time viewing it, you know, other than misremembering a 30 Rock episode, you know, the name of the film, of the piece itself, you know, it's clear it's leading to not so much, you know, exactly, it's the devil's baby, that's Rosemary's Baby, you know, I didn't know that, but though interestingly, I mean, the dream sequence, they tell you, I mean, okay, and everybody's in on it, and there's your husband, and okay, well, that's like a third of the way through the movie. So, you know, there's kind of no illusion after that. It's more just you know, revealing the details. You know, I think for me, because it's so interesting, I'll frame it this way. When Asia submitted it, I didn't know the context. And so now growing into comprehending the kind of context of the film, and I don't mean the surrounding real world context, I mean the film itself, the narrative context, you know, and as I referenced a few minutes ago, my personal marital relationship and watching, I think I was just heartbroken by because one of the questions I wrote down is, what do you worry you're trading, TRAD, because
Yeah.
Because, man, like we can identify the heightened world of this film and the things that are happening, but you know, as a bombastic personality with a meeker counterpart in persona, there are very real fears of what have I, you know, sort of pursued of my own ends that shrunk or diminished or overlooked or dismissed, or rendered a moot point my spouse's intentions and desires and what have you over time. And so, you know, that's I guess all I'm trying to say is I was thinking about this earlier for a text written by a man and a film, you know, written and directed by, it's an incredibly feminist film. I mean, it is very much what the F are you people doing to this person? And
Right.
you know, I am curious a little bit to, we don't have to do this right now, but I am curious from both of you who've read it and you know, kind of contextualize a little bit for me the agency aspect at the end. I mean, you told me how it presents it, but how do you read that in terms of her kind of story there? Because the film left me a bit like, oh my God, the breaking happened, you know, like if the whole march of the story is bending, her ascent to step over to that bassinet was the break. Was, in other words, I didn't necessarily read it as agency as much as, if agency, it is how I saw it, was coerced. It was, we're all here, I'm in it, and I guess I'll make this choice now.
Right.
And so, you know, that kept resonating with me of, you know, I am a person of semi, or rather defined, quote unquote, interests and things I like to indulge, and you know, not just a spouse but children as well. Like what are the things we sort of trade that specialness and uniqueness and time. And I'll shut up after this, but even just recently, and I don't know if y'all have these experiences where you Richard Rohr talks often, or defines contemplation as seeing what is, seeing reality for what it is. And just recently, my wife and I were sitting down on the porch. It was cool outside, and so we're kind of enjoying the night air. And my father-in-law years ago made stools. He dabbled in woodworking for a season, and he made these wooden stools, like step stools, for all our kids, and their names are engraved upon it. On each, you know, they each have their own. And we're sitting on the porch, and one of those stools is on the porch, and I had this real, because sadly contemplation doesn't come to me by intention. It hits me in the face. In other words, I'm not wise enough to set out to pursue it. But I was looking at this stool, and I was like, this thing is my life right now. And I don't mean in a metaphysical, I'm a stool. That's not the point. Right. The point is like, I am in my life. And it was this really weird experience and sensation of, and I even said to my wife in the moment, like, do you see that stool? Like, we are when you're a kid and you're looking at your parents and you're just sort of living your life and you're just moving through the motions, you don't think about these things. They just exist as a signifier and a thing to point to that shape a life. We are there. And it was a weird moment to look at this totem and be like, I am in my life. And it's those moments where you, to use scriptural language that I'll import over to what I just said, where you cease striving and you stop trading, right? You stop bartering the goodness that is manifest to you for the superficiality that is our silly interest sometimes. Anyway, I actually didn't mean to dominate quite so much there, but that's what kind of came to me by way of your question, Reed.
Yeah. Asia, I'd love to hear your thoughts on any or all of that if you have them ready.
In terms specifically of what do we trade, or I guess
Just-
which part are you asking about?
Actually, I mean, take them in whichever in whichever order you know at your discretion. But not only just the trading thing, but speaking to Rosemary's agency toward the end, and I'm fascinated by that. Also, just any element of that whole wrestling of what we exchange in our lives for fragile, cheaper things.
I think for me, it's interesting because I had a very different experience the first time I watched the movie, and I wonder if it has something to do with the fact that I'm a woman. I don't know.
Sure.
When I first watched the film, I had not read the book. I saw the film before reading the book, so I didn't have the extra context that the book fleshes out. But that moment, Rosemary starts to love him before Roman even suggests that she's supposed to.
Wow.
She stands there and you can tell she's fighting with herself. You're trying to get me to be his mother. Almost in a way that she's pushing what she actually is just feeling waves of at the moment. And Roman simply states what she already knows. Aren't you his mother? And I guess I saw Rosemary not so much hitting a breaking point at that moment. I guess I always saw her progression through the film as a sort of fading and coming back, or a sort of dissipating and reappearing. At the beginning, she is solid and she is who she is, and she has a goal and a course in life. And over the course of the film, those who are supposed to care for her strip that away from her covertly, and she becomes less solid, less visible. There's this sort of personal fading that takes place in her until there's almost nothing of Rosemary left. But once she realizes that her pain, both physical and emotional, have not been all in her head, and one person is able to validate what she has suspected to be true, fundamentally something is wrong here, she starts to solidify again. And I guess I saw that ending of her kind of charging into that living room with this sort of non-plan and a very large knife as the ultimate solidification. She is Rosemary again. The question now is, what is Rosemary going to do now that she actually has the decision? I guess I don't know if she had much of a decision, because it's not like they could have let her go, but I definitely did view the decision made as hers. I don't think she really could have made another decision, because she already loved it. She already loved him and had this whole time.
Yeah.
And in defense, I'm sorry, real quick, Reed, in defense of both of your interpretations of the ending based in the text and on that experience, I'm actually not defending what I positioned as it was just in the moment in my head. It was the trajectory my brain was on. But no, I think you make a very compelling notion there of, because if anything, how you've articulated that recontextualizes why someone, in this case you, our guest, would find such a deep love for the film itself. Meaning my initial read being, oh God, they finally broke this poor woman. Well, that's a lot different lingering taste than, oh God, she found a choice and she can redeem this dreadfulness. And that's actually really powerful and does refashion how you view that, and is interesting. And Reed, I'll throw this up in the air and run with it or don't, this, because I was reading articles and stuff about the film today, just to try to wrap my head a little bit around it, because, and Reed can attest to this, my initial thought was like, holy crap, this is just a big film, and there's, it's eating an elephant. And and so I was just trying to figure out, okay, ground myself a little bit in some of the commentary on it. But what I kept coming back to was its response. And Reed, as you indicated, this sort of trend it set off in the reel. And I mean, to the point that like the Catholic Church, it was like blackballed and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So real intense response.
They always like,
Well, sure.
in general. Yeah. Anyway.
I didn't mean so much to identify that, but yes. All the things. But there's a way, we are a show that for 4.5 years or so redeemed the devil baby. Like that's what we try to do. And it's just interesting because there are moments where I'm like, this is an intense film. And clearly it set off a shockwave in a pop culture standpoint and in just a cultural standpoint. And so wrestling with like, how seriously should I take that sort of conversation? And just really kind of dealing with that aspect of it. And so, long-winded way of simply saying, reframing her moment at the end actually goes far to say, okay, well, you know what? I can kind of engage this in a way that's different than purely saying, oh, it's a movie about a woman having the devil's baby. You know, it's like, well, you know.
Well, because okay, so
Yeah, jump in.
that's the thing that has not 45 minutes ago is when it started clicking in my imagination. I didn't come pre-prepped for this, but just what we're saying and how we're saying it is clicking for me. It's right there in the title. We keep joking about how it's the devil's baby. It's not the devil's baby. It's Rosemary's baby.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that I'm a writer myself, and so I know that it's just the shorthand for like that's the prop that it's setting up. What's up with Rosemary's Baby or whatever. But I do think there's Ira Levin was a savvy writer, and I think there is a lot to be said in the fact that that is the title, that at
Sure.
the end that's where you're landed. This is Rosemary's Baby.
Right.
Yes, its father was the devil, but this is Rosemary's baby, and she has
But.
but sure, like. We all got something, you know. It's
Technicalities.
Technicalities. It's like
Yeah.
the ending of Some Like It Hot, where they're like, "No, you don't understand. I'm a man," and he goes, "Well, nobody's perfect," you know. Like, so, but like it's one of those things where I feel very much and coming into not only an appreciation but recognizing affection for the film of and for the story of seeing how. You know, we Nathan, you talk about describing this breaking and everything, and I really feel like that happens at that 45-minute mark during that illusory sort of state where they, you know, like it's deeply uncomfortable to watch. That entire sequence is. I understand why, you know, J. Mark would express like that nothing has stayed with him quite as much as that scene. It's really, really harrowing to sit through that scene. And that's where like this breaking comes, and the breaking, it's almost as if you view that as kind of like the breaking point, and then every single time that there comes to be any moment of reclamation, they cast it down with, we know better than you, you know, like all of these kinds of things that they perpetually sort of overwhelm her with, either by outright dismissing whatever she's expressing for herself or by actively saying, you don't know what you're talking about. You know, like when she picked up the book and understood that it could be an ectopic pregnancy, and he's like, see, look, books only worry you. And I'm like, this is a medical doctor saying like, don't read, you know, like it's so outlandish. But then at the end, when she finally gets to instruct somebody else, so you're doing that wrong. Like you don't know what you're doing about the woman who's rocking the baby, and she's rocking him, you know, far too hard. She's like, you're doing that wrong. You don't know what you're doing. And it does begin to recontextualize. It's like, no, that's a reclamation of power. That's a reclamation of agency. That's a standing into, no, this is my baby. You know, and even to the degree as haunting a character as Roman is, when he's like, "Aren't you its mother?" And it feels very invigorating that she would, as a character, embrace, "By God, I am, I am its mother, his mother," and so yeah, there is a lot, and what's wild to me is like, okay. So this is I'm going to tap dance on something that's just tangential to the film, because
As long as actual tap dancing is involved, go for it.
Please.
I got some light shoes. But I feel like I am very frustrated individually with the ways my circles will talk about the devil. I am supremely frustrated with the ways that so much of the church circles that I grew up in and that I still have a multitude of friends in will talk about the devil. A moment like this climax, when suddenly friggin' the woman from the Andy Griffith Show is "Hail Satan," like it's scandalous, like it's really, it's very volcanic to that end, and there's something
surprise.
But there's something. Ironically, Ira Levin is also the author of No Time for Sergeants, which many consider to be a precursor to Gomer Pyle USMC. Anyway, so but the thing that gets at me is, that this movie is not and the story, it's not about the devil. And I feel like there's so many times where we're looking at these tensions or these conflicts, and I'm just going to throw this statement out there, and anybody else can shut me down for a fool or whatever. But I'm going to throw this statement out there. It's like, I almost feel I'm very much bringing Reed to this piece. I don't know if I can do anything else, but I almost feel it's like somebody could be like, "Oh, look at the work of the devil to make this conspiracy about having this baby," and I'm like, "No, the work of the devil was this freaking don't read, don't do all of this other stuff. Don't understand who you are, and don't understand what you are seeking in life, and don't understand what is right and good and working, all of that stuff." It's like, that's the stuff that really gets under my skin. Tangential to this recording, there's been a tremendous amount of controversy surrounding the rapper and musician Lil Nas X and his Satan shoes, where they've done, where like Nike is suing them and everything. And it is frustrating the crap out of me in the real how everybody that is in these circles that would be terribly like upset by that are up in arms of like, "Oh my gosh, like we need to stop this. We need to put a stop to this." And all I can think about are all the tremendous insidious ways in which pervasive systemic evil has like crept in, and y'all don't bat an eye. Y'all don't care. Y'all couldn't care less about the ways that like people get cast down. People have their foot on the necks of individuals, and they are casting down entire people groups, and these systemic sort of ways in which these things have been oppressing people. And so I see a film like Rosemary's Baby in this context, and it is really, really difficult for me not to walk away going, yeah, like the devil's work, if you want to put it that way. Maybe that's not the right way to put it, but the devil's work was in all of this sort of conspiratorial, systemic, subtle temptation and oppression, not the moment when it's like he's got his daddy's eyes. Because in point of fact, when everything is brought into light, that's probably the best opportunity for Rosemary in the novel and in the reading of the film, for Rosemary to say, "I can do something here. I have a place here that can do something." Maybe redemption is too far. Maybe it's not. To say like, I can take a place here where I've had no place for so long. I don't know if that sparks anything or if I'm just having a therapy session, but that's where I'm sitting.
No, that pings with me so strongly. One of the things I even wrote down was, forgive me if this is a crass way of saying it, but the devil had to show up and do one thing. The only reason that this plot worked is because Guy was willing to do everything else for them.
Oh God. Yeah.
And that just hurts. It physically hurts to know that the one person who was supposed to protect her is the one person who was willing to, like, pinging back to what Nathan said, trade the dearest thing in the world to her for whatever it was that made him feel better about himself.
Right.
And even though the dream sequence, or whatever we want to call that, even though that is a very disturbing, very upsetting, uncomfortable sequence, I guess for me, I will admit I was shocked that I wasn't more affected by it the first time I watched the film. If anything, I thought that was one of the least frightening scenes for me, because it was the only truthful scene up to that point in the film.
Wow.
This is what's actually happening. And it's pretty apparent, and I knew just from the lore of the film, this was the quintessential Spawn of Satan film. So I took that scene literally when it came.
Sure, understood. Yeah.
But the fact that, for me at least, a scene of that nature, of that level of graphicness, could not compare to the things that the everyday humans could do to each other really stuck with me. And just knowing that none of what happened could have happened without Minnie and Roman and Guy. And if any one of these people at any point had said no, everything would have been different. So to say that, oh, the devil's plan was seen through, he needed an awful lot of help to get there, it seems, you know?
No, absolutely. And this is what drives me. So what drives me nuts is it's so easy for people to talk about the devil as if light somehow trembles in the face of darkness, as if this is what's been driving me crazy as people have been talking about, like, you know, oh, the work of the enemy, or, you know, the boldness of the enemy, or, you know, all these other kinds of stuff. And there's like freaking for the past several years, there has been, I'm only giving lip service to it because it's relevant to this conversation, there's an entire underground web of conspiracy theory that says, hey, everybody, Rosemary's Baby's happening like in real time in the hidden halls of Congress and in the hidden halls of everything else. And they actually believe this. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because when you believe these sort of outlandish things, then what it positions you to do is to not recognize the ways in which you are complicit to deeply profound evils and have been sort of twisted and pushed forward. You make a statement that I think is really powerful. It's like he had to have a lot of help. And that's because the position that I, apologies, I'm getting so passionate about this. I didn't really intend it to, but the position that I believe, should be adopting is, no, you have no power over me. Like, what are you, like, you don't have this power over me. Who told you were naked? Who lied to you and said there's this deep abiding power? But somebody, but you know, Lil Nas X releases Satan shoes and everybody's like, oh my God, you know, like this is too far.
The black gay man.
Right. Absolutely. Utterly relevant to the conversation, because I keep sitting here thinking, when did we start believing that light somehow is threatened by the movement of darkness? And it only works if he has a lot of help, if he has a tremendous amount of help. Go ahead, Nathan. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I mean, I don't want Asia to feel left out because, you know, it's her film and
apologies.
I love it.
I'm saying I'm about to do it too. But Reed, there's several things that are firing in my spirit right now, and one of which is possibly going to lead to the other. Is you reference this Satan shoes idea, and you identify the potency of the name of the film being Rosemary's Baby. And I think something that really jumps out at me, because, you know, you commented the other night via text about the Nike thing, and I was like, what are you talking about? I just had not seen the foofara over it. And what should be troubling to all of us is our inability to reckon with someone can call a dumb pair of sneakers Satan shoes and we lose our minds. But when someone calls themselves Christian, pastor, priest, minister, and they subject their followers to all sorts of nefariousness, we still say, well, you know, we give them a I almost dropped the F-bomb. We give them a pass. And it's like, what the hell is wrong with us? But I want to not generalize our malaise here, but names matter, but substance matters more. And you identifying this as Rosemary's Baby, and we watch the substance meet the name in the film. These are shoes, you idiot.
Right.
There's nothing
Right.
to this. Now, pivoting that into, because what I'm trying to establish is I want us to be poetic and Shakespearean, and a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. But what I'm trying to identify is the substance does matter more than the name. And there's a non-dualistic version of things that says, well, is it Satan's shoes or is it a Christian pastor? You're missing the point. There's a substantive essence that needs to be reckoned with. And right now in the real is playing out a crazy trial of the policeman who was responsible, if you want to believe the mountain of evidence, for the death of George Floyd. And what's scary to me is Rosemary under and oppressed and assaulted by a heinous enemy saying, this is not a dream, this is really happening. May as well be 2021's I can't breathe. Like, will you listen to what you are subjecting me to? And I can't escape that. And that this notion that we want to hang our faith on challenging sneaker companies is bullshit. And meanwhile, literal actual people are dying and are actually dying and or just being transgressed against in heinous ways by individuals, by systems. And we just say, well, you know, capitalism, or, well, you know, Blue Lives Matter, forgive me. But the point is simply, we lose. So we are as, I mean, it's guys standing in the circle. It's us. You know, it's not lost on me that it's the generic name for man.
Yes.
You know,
very intentional.
Anyway.
Well, and he says it in there to her. He says, but think about, look at all we're going to get. Like going back to your trading question, he said, look at all we're going to get.
We're getting so much in return, Ro.
We're getting so much in return. And
now he's playing the pronoun game right there.
Yeah, absolutely he is. Because it's all about him. At every inch of that has all been about him. He offered her up. Like the fact that the first people he wants to tell is Roman and Minnie, like he offered her up. And the other thing, and then I promise I will shut up for a beat because I want to hear more of Asia's thoughts on this. But like everybody along the way, all the insidious things they're doing, it's all in the name of we're just trying to help. We're all just trying to help. But that's one of the most pervasive lies is this is for your own good. I'm, putting you in some sort of like bondage for your own good. And that just is one of the most haunting and despicable sort of lies we tell ourselves about the ways that we're just manipulating and coercing others into trying to only get what we want. Yeah, you had to suffer this and you had to suffer that and that's like, but look at all that we get in return, and it just is really a very upsetting kind of dynamic to think about the ways in which we justify the heinous positions we put other people in for our own comfort or for our own advancement or for anything else. And I know we just took this little intimate film and just like exploded it. But I really am very interested in you sharing more of your thoughts about it, Asia, but it being a very personal film to you too. So and all of that. Yeah.
Kind of ping-ponging off of that. It really made me think. One of the other thoughts that I had upon rereading the book and revisiting the film for this specifically, that I feel like jumps off of that is towards the end when she goes to Dr. Hill and is so close to being rescued.
Right.
I wrote down, what an idol we make of reputation, because Dr. Hill is ready to believe her and help her. At least that's how I read it and saw it until she said that her doctor was Saperstein.
Oh wow.
And he
Yeah.
instantly,
Yeah.
it
He was
became,
blank.
yeah, it became her word against his. And never mind this living, breathing, traumatized, desperate, pregnant woman in front of him. This guy is Dr. Saperstein,
Right.
who was on open end. I have a pre-existing notion of who I think this individual is supposed to be in all of his credentials and all of his experience, and it cannot compare to what this woman is telling me.
Right.
So therefore, she is wrong. And I think that corresponds. There's a line that Minnie says at a different point in the film that I always felt like connected to this idea, but I couldn't understand why until just now. When Rosemary is being assaulted, Guy makes a comment that she's awake. And then Minnie says she's not awake. If so long as she ate the mouse, she can't see nor hear. She's like dead. Now sing. And how easy it is for us in the face of whatever it is that we are used to. We want to feel comfortable. We want to toe a line, or we don't want to make waves. So we just sing. How easy is it for us to rationalize or let somebody else pressure us to just sing? I don't know if those thoughts knit together as nicely as I would have liked them to, but they've always kind of gone jumbled like that in my head.
This is what I took from it, and you can course correct me if I misread, but it's like the comfort of ritual, and we are so allergic to allowing our rituals to be upended or our rituals to be confronted. The comfort of routine, the comfort of habit, and something that I read recently. What was that?
Busyness.
Busyness. Yes, absolutely. Something that I read just recently, and I can't remember which book. I read all the time. No, but something.
All of them witches.
All of them witches. I can't remember, and I feel bad that I can't remember what book it was in. But it was a passing thing. It wasn't even the point they were making, but they were talking about allergy, and it might have been in the book "The Person You Mean to Be" that I referenced a few episodes ago. They said what you need to recognize about allergy is that it's not actually the catalyst which kills you, it's the reaction. So like peanut is not harmful to anybody, but certain people's bodies process it in a way that is harmful to them because of the reaction to it. And that's why an EpiPen or something will put the body back in its right state. It's like there's nothing harmful about it except what it causes within you. And that as a purely biological reality haunts me when I consider it in mental, emotional, and spiritual realities of it's like actually the power and the potency, there's no danger in and of itself. It's what it's causing in you or what it's doing in you. And the ways we can embrace certain the just sing idea, the way that we can just be like, I'm going to go back to what's comfortable for me. I'm just going to slide into it. I'm going to ignore the new information. I'm going to ignore what I saw on that person's face, what pain that was, what suffering that was, what fear that was. I'm going to ignore that, and I'm going to go right back into it's like, I believe in the scriptures, it is in the book of James, where it talks about like, if you see somebody who needs something from you and you're the furthest, I'm paraphrasing egregiously, but like your furthest extent is, I'm going to pray for you. Like, and then you just move on down the line, and there's nothing else accompanying with that. That's where he talks about, he's like, faith without works is dead. Not as in you have to have works to have faith, or you have to have works to be faith, but it's like if your faith does not produce works, it's dead inside you. It means nothing to you. It is empty, hollow ritual, which is akin to what Christ said to his disciples when he said, like, if all you do is just vainly repeat these things instead of actually entering into the substance of prayer, what good have you done? And I feel like so much of the ways in which we will become in our own lives, the Minnies or the Romans or the Guys, God forbid, is we just continue to adopt what is comfortable and what is safe to us, and we are not willing to confront our own presumptions, confront our own conclusions, and God help the multitude of ways in which we may have been to people like Rosemary, people like Guy. Like just God forbid and God forgive the ways in which, if we are unwilling because of the embrace of our ritual, like you said, I'm just going to go on singing. I don't know what to do about this, so I'm just going to ignore it. And so I'm just going to press on. And that's just a hideous and horrific kind of thought to me. I don't know any more than anybody else what to do about it in this moment because it feels too big. But like it's just a horrendous thought to think that we would have just decided to keep going on singing instead of recognizing, like, no, this person is awake. And even more so than that, God, what are we doing? The amount of times the scriptures talks about where somebody it was lost in a sort of a track, and they just then when it says when the prodigal son came to his senses, like when he woke up and was like, oh my God, what am I doing here? And how desperately that's needed in so many different avenues of our life and world right now. Yeah. So this is the moment. We've been talking about this for a while. So this is the moment where, in deference to our guest who has submitted, to us this big what scares us, I don't want to leave the conversation without taking a moment and making sure that you've said what you wanted to say about it, or that, whatever it is, even if it's a glance off subject or anything, I just want to give you a platform for a few minutes without Nathan and I interrupting you, of saying whatever it is you want to say about the film that you may not have had the chance to
over
yet.
here.
You know what? I don't need your qualifying. I'm just kidding. So yeah, by all means, go ahead.
It's interesting. I have all these notes over here, and I'm trying to decide if they're more distracting than helpful. But
welcome to a Fear of God conversation.
Yeah.
Like, do I? We'll just follow.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. I think there is one element that I do want to bring up, and it is a little bit off to the side, and it's a little bit maybe disjointed, but it's something I just can't get out of my head because it feels too creepy and bizarrely coincidental to just leave it where it is.
Sure.
And Reed, you may have also put this together yourself, having read the book. So if you know where I'm going, you can chime in as well. There is something very interesting in the book, in the scene where Rosemary meets Terry. In the film, they exchange, that Terry looks like this actress, Victoria Vetri, which happens to be the actress Victoria Vetri in the film.
That was funny. Yeah, right. Yeah.
That is her. But in the book, Terry says back to Rosemary, oh, and you look like Piper Laurie, who plays Margaret White in the film Carrie.
Right. Right.
Who, when I first came across that and wanted to recall who she was, I had not seen the film Carrie. So I typed in her name to see if she was real. She was. But if you look up Piper Laurie in Carrie, you find, or if you've even, if you've seen the film Carrie, which I know you guys have, she has this alarmingly similar aesthetic moment in a sort of perverse inversion to Rosemary in this moment of a mother in a state of in a traumatized mental state, in a nightgown with a kitchen knife charging towards her baby. And it just really, I don't know, it kind of won't let me go, the fact that the woman who at least in Ira Levy's mind looked like, inspired the physicality of Rosemary, ended up in such a similar, non-similar, bizarre inverted part. That's so off to the side, but it kept going around in my brain, so I wanted to at least bring it up.
No, of course. And it's funny because I did not make that connection, but as soon as you say it does make a tremendous amount of sense, because that story as well is, you talk about this sort of tremendous inversion. so, and Carrie White gets invoked in rather recurring fashion from time to time on the show, but it really is this same thing where it's about someone coming to their own in a sense of agency, and how tremendously frightening that is because of everything that is against them. Like Carrie in her story is so Rosemary in this one is up against a coven of devil worshippers. Carrie in her story is up against a religious fanatic, an absolute crazy religious fanatic in her mother, and also a just completely callous bunch of bullies in her high school. And that's what's confronting her agency. And it is what I keep thinking about is just how dreadfully scary it is in this world to be who you are. It is just so dreadfully scary to be who you are, and to have the courage to stand up and just say, no, this is a truth about who I am, and this is a truth about what I've experienced or what has been up against me from these experiences. It takes profound courage. I don't know if this is precisely like what you were scratching at with the Margaret White thing, but one of the moments that stands out to me so much, from again going back to scriptural stories, the woman at the well in John 4, it has always struck me that what pinged her, at least what she verbalized to other people about why she knew Jesus was safe and that he was who he claimed to be, was that he told her everything she'd ever done. And it has always struck me, there's a mountain of sermons about it, but he saw her. And God, how many times that woman must have felt unseen and must have felt completely invisible or used, or whatever. Five husbands, the person she was with was not her husband, and all of these things that the scripture lays out for us. And the fact that Jesus had seen her finally. And you think about, like, Rosemary stepping up and finally seeing her child, at the end, and feeling perhaps to a degree seen by her child as the child calms when he's in her arms, because he recognizes that it's his mother, and there's just so much to that of pivoting back. And this will be kind of my final statement on before the fog meter, but pivoting back to all of that, it's like Guy during the sequence, the assault scene, he sees she's awake.
Right.
She can see. All of these things are just clicking about seeing and being seen. He sees she's awake. She sees what's going on. And getting back to the Carrie thing, like just wanting to be seen and wanting to belong and all of these kinds of things, and how much is against so many people in just the simple effort to be seen and to be known and to be able to stand in any position and say, here I am. This, to quote The Greatest Showman, this is me. Like, this is, I'm standing here. I am before you. And what holy work it can be, regardless of what we do with it, of just seeing people and just being, and just, maybe it comes down to validation. Maybe it's something richer and deeper, but I see you, like, there you are. And I see you for who you are, and the power that had when Jesus communicated that to the woman at the well, such that she told the whole town about it. Like, she completely is like, I'm seen. Somebody finally, all these years, God knows how many years, I'm finally seen. And that is such profoundly holy work. We keep pivoting it away, trying to make people invisible, trying to make people unseen, trying to make people fit into the molds that we fashioned, or trying to, commodify people as means to an end to something else, rather than just that holy work of stopping. What you said earlier, Nathan, about like, I'm in my life and you're in yours. And in this moment, we can lock eyes, we can share stories, we can maybe pass along similar journeys for however long that intersection goes, but to lock eyes and to truly see. And we are in our life right now, like we're here, and what a profound gift that is, and what a profound beauty that is. Again, rather than just commodifying or creating people as just a catalyst for particular reactions, not the devil's baby, Rosemary's Baby. And anyway, now I'm at the risk of being incoherent with all of my thoughts. Do it,
Mm.
Nathan? Do you have anything else, or Asia? Do you have anything else beyond that, or should we go to the fog meter? What are you thinking, Asia?
I do have something, but I'll let Nathan go for the sake
No,
of
nope.
rounding it out.
Do it. Take
Okay.
it.
Okay, yeah, take it.
I think for me,
I'm just being in my life over here, just soaking it all up.
this really is sort of, I guess, this was the one thing that in all of this and really mulling it over hit me at one point and kind of took my breath away, because I keep coming back to this very, very intense feeling about Guy, in that, like I said before, the one person who should have protected her was the one person that really did her the most harm. And the craziest part about it is that he wasn't even in the coven. He didn't care about whether or not Satan's child was born. He didn't care about Satan. He didn't care about anything other than himself. And it kind of just crashed on me one day that in order to serve the devil very well, you only have to serve yourself.
Oh my God.
And that to me has been the one theme that I have found inescapable every time I engage with this material since then.
No, that's terrible.
You're gonna drop that mic?
That is a mic drop if I ever heard it. No, that's absolutely.
That looks like at least mildly expensive mic. You don't have to drop it.
I can think of no better place to conclude the story. I think that's a really powerful observation, that to serve the devil, you need only serve yourself. That's going to stay with me. That having been said, do you want to go to the fog meter, ye old fog meter? Nathan, you've been quiet for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I've just steamrolled through this entire.
It's all right. It's all right.
I feel I've never felt more like Minnie in my life. It's really, it's a very uncomfortable experience for me.
Yeah, I think what you're detecting is my wrestling recognition of that, and just being like, okay, I'm just gonna personally enjoy and soak and be in my life while others be in theirs. Sure, let's do it. Let's go to the fog meter, our very own measuring of what we think of a film we cover, specifically with reference to fear and or how scary it is, and God and or how substantive it is. Asia, I'm going to start with you as our guest, and then we'll go to Reed and then myself and back again. For you, how would you rank on a scale of 1 to 10 fear in Rosemary's Baby?
1 to 10 fear. This one was hard for me because I wouldn't call this a scary movie. There's no jump scares. I'm not terribly, I'm not going to necessarily lose sleep over it, but I leave this film deeply moved and disturbed just about every time in some way at something new. So I'm going to give this a 7, in that to me, it becomes more potent every single time I watch it.
It keeps getting funnier every single time I see it. Reed,
that was about The Exorcist. That's true.
I know that.
It's really harrowing. It's really harrowing. I agree with everything Asia just said. Like I think depending on how you approach the film and what you take away from it is going to sort of change a bit of your fear factor on it. But 8 feels right to me. I think I'm going to give this an 8.
You know, it's so wild. And I feel like what we've done, I'm going to pat us all on the back right here.
Oh, really?
I feel like what we've done the last hour 40 is exactly what we set out to do here, which is examining what scares us to find what saves us. Because as I've sort of processed this movie, I mean, it's a boulder. It, like, trying to wrap your arms around kind of what's going on here is just massive and really challenging to pull off. And like I said, I referenced this earlier, but even reading the response at the time, it's like, what is wrong with me? Am I okay? Like, why do I not respond this way? But it's from these conversations that we can take the teeth out and recognize, I mean, there's something here. Yeah. I'll say it because it's to a non-specific person. Yeah, ignorant viewer. Yeah, it references the devil and the devil's baby, but like you're kind of missing what can really be present in this if you were to scratch below the surface. And that's a long-winded way of simply saying, after my viewing of it and the reading about it and now this conversation, I don't really find it that scary. Now, it does excellently build dread. I mean, one thing we didn't reference on a technical level, but there's a ton of single take shots that just, you know, thin out your stress level or bulk up your stress level, as it were. So that's definitely present there. But in terms of just, it is a weird feeling to be like, hey, you know what, guys, we should, or just to a random crew, just like, y'all seen Rosemary's Baby? You will love it. It is so funny.
It's on Prime. Let's pull it
I
up.
am that person.
Oh, well, sure. No, that is loud and clear. But you had to get there at least, you know. But I'm feeling that energy too. It's like, yeah, let's just pop in Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah.
You know? But this is about the devil's baby. No, it is not. The title is Rosemary's Baby. And if you want a good conversation about it, listen to this episode. So as far as scares go, I think I'm going to go for a 6.
All right.
That's a really long way to get there.
I loved so much of what you said, though.
Thank you. Asia, back to you for the God factor. How would you rank this in terms of substance?
This one, I tried to find a number before we got on here and I just couldn't. And so I'm going to have to do that now. It's so difficult because, as we've seen, it's so rich. It's so rich with spiritual terms and, you know, a film that directly deals with heaven, hell, the devil. I think it's easy to say, oh, this ranks high because it deals so directly and so literally with these themes. But the one thing, I guess it is the one criticism I have with the film is there is no direct, or at least no overt response to Roman screaming, God is dead.
Oh, right.
Other than Rosemary engaging then in an act of profound godliness, which is to accept her child.
Right.
And for that reason, I think I would give it a 6 as opposed to something higher, which for me, it's tempting to give it something higher.
Try to go there. Right.
But because I guess it does kind of take 3 little excavators to get to some of this. I would give it more of a 6.
I've never been called little. That's been a long time since that happened. Excavator, I get that pretty routinely, but
yeah, I've been called that too many times by my co-host. So
just call me Minnie.
I think for myself, God, this is hard because so I feel like, just to kind of cut to the chase, I usually, when I'm building this measurement, give films points for what films or material or anything, points for what they are interested in and for what's kind of baked in there. And I think by pure nature of the fact that this is a novel from the 60s and a film from 1968 that is still being talked about as a landmark in the genre, it clearly resonated with just an absolute, volcano of pop culture influence and everything. So by virtue of that, I'm gonna lean gracious here and I'm gonna give it a 9. What say you, Mr.
Asia made me second guess myself, and so because I was gonna come out with a 10 strong.
Bam.
So I'll stick with it, acknowledging that I can't decide if I'm reading the craftsmanship as substance. Does that make sense? Like, it's incredibly well crafted. I will say, I mean, even at the end of it, and Reed can vouch for that, text him, I was like, that was intense. And intense is a word I typically reserve for, like, oh my God, there's a lot happening here. It is interesting to me where I'm going to reserve that word, where Mr. Polanski's life took him for what I said 45 minutes ago is a very feminist film. So I don't know. I can't decide if the film is in contrast to its in this iteration filmmaker or what. So because of how beastly it feels to wrestle down, I do feel like there's a lot there. So I will stick with my 10 just to admit. That's where I'm going to go with Rosemary.
Speak your truth, Rosemary.
That's absolutely.
I'm in my life, and it's a 10. My life is a 10.
So that means that we give Rosemary's Baby, written by Ira Levin and directed by Roman Polanski, a 7.5 out of 10 on the fog meter. Ye old fog meter. But I think the question that I would ask, especially Mr. Rouse, you seeing it for the first time, would you recommend Rosemary's Baby? Sounds like you do. Do you?
That is a cautious recommend. I mean, I find it immensely interesting and you know, in the ways our conversations can occasionally do, propel you back in and be like, huh, I'm gonna go check that out again. So but I do recommend it. Its film craft is exceptional. I think it will always, for better or worse, be a recommend with an asterisk, that being just it. I'll once more pat us on the back here. It takes some wisdom. It takes some maturity to receive that recommendation and not walk away a raving lunatic, or naming me for having recommended it a raving lunatic. But it just takes some wisdom. It takes some discernment. It takes some cognizance of, okay, you can't just be like, oh my God,
right? No.
Devil baby movie.
No, absolutely. Before we let our guest sort of round us out, I would echo and amen what you just said. I think it takes some wisdom. I think it takes, those particular caveats. There's a world, though, in which horror genre or not, this is kind of feels like an essential film, like just in cinema history.
Yeah.
And so, on that basis, I do wholeheartedly recommend it. And I do feel like it requires some wisdom to digest it properly and to critique it and analyze it properly. But in that spirit of not only essential horror cinema, but essential cinema, I do recommend it. Asia, round us out, bring us home. Do you recommend it?
I don't have a single friend that I haven't recommended it to. I need to get a little bit
now
better.
I don't have a single friend.
Exactly. How do you think I got here?
Wow, I will choose to receive that in a positive fashion.
I mean it with such affection.
Yes, for sure.
But I definitely do need to maybe apply some more of that wisdom in terms of who I do or do not recommend the film to, because at this point I just toss it to people.
Sure, like confetti.
Rice.
Yeah, or rice. Confetti or rice. Just go. You like watch tennis. Rosemary's Baby. You watch. Whoa.
The volume of people. Like, see, this is where I can relate. Like, the volume of people that I have done the exact same thing to regarding The Exorcist.
Yep.
And people are like I even have to caveat these days when people ask me like, "Oh, Reed's a big movie buff. What's your favorite film?" And I'm like, "Brace yourself."
Yeah.
Are you sitting down?
Right, please.
Well, I love the idea. I don't know if it exists because it just coming to me in real time. I would love a trailer made of Rosemary's Baby fashioned as a rom-com, like just wayfish New York socialite getting adjusted to, oh, hubby's not around much, but oh, baby's coming, just like put this tinkly little fun calliope music around, and I would love that. And that's what you would send people. It's like, it's about she wants to have a baby and it's gonna be great, but you don't tell anything of the plot. That would be amazing. I would love it. Somebody get on that.
To the typewriter. Oh, Lord have mercy. Well, we cannot thank you enough, Asia, for taking time out of your evening and for being with us. This was really fun. We hope you had a good time. We hope you had a fun time. This was a conversation I'm already going to be sort of echoing back to for myself in a lot of ways. Thank you so much for suggesting this film as part of What Scares Us. And thank you so much for being here. We really, really appreciate your presence here.
Thank you for having me. Again, this was such a treat, especially I've been listening to you guys for years now. And so I had a mild seizure when you asked me. And I was so excited.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, we should do this again. No, not necessarily Rosemary's Baby Part 2, but we should find other contexts again, because
apparently there is a sequel though. That would be funny to just
It
have
looks
Asia
bad.
back on just for this sequel that's supposedly super bad.
Yeah.
We all, it's funny. It's like we have this really profound, rich 2-hour conversation, and then we do the sequel, and we're all sitting here like, why do we do this?
Mhm.
And then there's a third conversation about the 30 Rock episode Rosemary's Baby featuring Carrie Fisher.
And that just bleeds off into other,
Yeah.
Carrie Fisher movies, and it just,
Sure.
it just
Whatever.
Yeah.
it's the long train.
Last
Yeah.
Jedi B-side. Go for it.
Yeah, Rosemary's Baby to Blues Brothers. Bring it.
Sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. You heard it here first. But no, sincerely, we'll have you back. Thank you so much. This was really, really fun. And listeners, thank you so much for dwelling with us in this. And as always, Nathan, thank you so much for being open-hearted and open-minded to share your thoughts with me on these little therapy sessions of ours. And listener, as we say on every episode, I cannot emphasize this enough, especially given the context of the conversation. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation. And in that spirit, we encourage you to fear nothing else. And be on your way rejoicing. So we will see you
Amen.
next week. As we've already mentioned, Channel Zero, Candle Cove next week. Get prepped for that, and we'll see you then. Thank you
See you
again,
guys.
Asia. Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you,
Bye,
Asia.
everybody.